This is Harry Davies from Mirror Fighting, joined by UFC legend, MMA analyst Dan Hardy after quite a crazy weekend. Dan, I'm sure you've given your thoughts to a lot of people, but I'm keen to hear them. So, how do you reflect on what went down over the weekend?
I mean, it was just kind of mind blowing, really, wasn't it? I mean, just going into the event, it was crazy. We arrive at the place and they've got an arena outside for the undercard, and then a massive Kingdom Arena, 20,000 seats that was built in August. It's like it's incredible just the setup that they had out there, and then to accommodate to host a fight like this, it was always going to be a big event. But the way that it played out was like unlike anything anybody expected. You look at Francis Ngannou and you go, well, if he's going to win, it's going to be one big punch, and Fury's not going to get up off the canvas, and then everyone's going to go, well, he landed a big punch that we knew was a small possibility, but because he in my opinion outboxed Fury for more rounds than Fury won, that was something that none of us expected. Like, I wasn't expecting him to come in and fight at range. I wasn't expecting him to maintain his discipline and his composure and to stand like a boxer, but switch stances and look for counter punches and not rush into range and smother his work. It was a shocking performance from Ngannou in all the best ways, and I honestly surprised me more than anybody else, I think.
And obviously the scorecards were, questionable best, and I think was 96, 93, 95, 94 in favor of Fury, with the other one going for Francis. I don't know if you rewatched it, if no one really expected to have a pen and paper whilst they're watching it, but if you haven't, or if you have, how did you sort of score it? Oh, there we go, you got it. So you have
Got
got
it.
it. How did you score it?
Well, so obviously I watched it live and I was scoring it then, and then I watched it back 4 times yesterday, and I watched it first time with the volume, 3 times on mute, went through it and watched it and kind of picked it apart. My scorecard's still the same, honestly. I went 96, 93 for Ngannou. I think the first round was the most difficult to score because very little happened. They both landed 3 power punches, but Fury landed slightly more, with his lead hand, a few light jabs. I don't let a jab sway around for me. I mean, 5 jabs, which was what the round came down to. I don't let that sway me because I feel like the power punching was better quality by Ngannou. I think he landed cleaner. I mean, overall with the fight, he landed 5 more power punches than Fury, even though he was outstruck by 12 punches total. For me, he just did the better work throughout the majority of the fight. So I had first, second, third being a 10-8, fourth round for Ngannou. So he was 5 rounds up going into the fifth round. And then I felt like Fury pulled back the fifth and sixth. Then Ngannou turned it up in the seventh and eighth. And then we had Fury 9 and 10. And, the reality is, I think if it had gone to 12 rounds, I think we'd have had 2 more on the scorecards for Fury. So he would have ended up picking up the win anyway. But as it stood, I had it 96, 93. And the only way I would really sway that scorecard is if I went the other way on the first round and gave it to Fury and brought it to 95, 94, but that's still a win for Ngannou.
I remember listening to the commentary, and Carl Frampton sort of scored it the same as you. He had Ngannou 5 rounds up after, and I thought it'd be one of those things that in the coming days everyone would watch it and be like, yeah, you know what? Like, I think we're getting caught at the moment, but it seems like 2 days on now that people are still seeing it as much of a robbery, as they call it, as they did on fight night. Is that the sort of same thing that you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was with Carl Frampton and Steve Bunce during the fight, and they were both scoring it as well. And we were pretty much in agreement on the rounds. I think Bunce went a different way on one of the rounds, but I can't remember which one. But yeah, Frampton was blown away. Like after the fight, and something he said in between rounds, which was really good, is he said, I think the boxing world needs to hang its head in shame a little bit for underestimating Francis so much. But I'll be honest, I underestimated him as well. Like, I didn't expect him to be a better boxer at times in the fight. So it was surprises all round. Generally, the consensus on the night was that Francis had won, and I think people generally feel that he still won. Sound effects of London. I feel like generally people feel like Francis won, but what I will say is I shared the flight home with a whole bunch of boxing royalty, and Frank Bruno, Ricky Hatton, Joe Calzaghe, as well as promoters for Queensbury and other people, and that they was well, no, I did score it for Fury. I did score it for Fury, and and maybe they score it a different way because they're boxers and I'm an MMA fighter. But I can't sway my decision based on a punch. It's not. I mean, a jab is very rarely a real punch. Like you look at somebody on the undercard like Moses Atama who dropped his opponent with a jab. That's more of a lead hand cross. Like we're not talking about anything of value from that lead hand of Fury that landed. So I can't sway the rounds based on a couple of touching lead hands. Like Ngannou landed 5 more power punches and he knocked him down. Like, and even if I go down round by round, I still feel like Francis won the better exchanges. So maybe if I can see it from a point scoring perspective, but it's not a game of tag, is it? It's not a tickling contest. It was the baddest on the planet. That's what we're looking for. And there was only one person that hit the canvas after landing a big left hook. For me, Francis won the fight.
Were there, obviously, I was watching from home, you were at the arena. Was there sort of like, almost visible gasps? Like I know you said Frampton was sort of like, you couldn't believe what he was watching. But for me, watching from home, obviously, come the halfway point, I was just fearing, it's going so well for Francis, but I just fear he's going to slow down and it's going to be one-sided second half. But it never really was the case, right? It almost seemed like sort of too good to be true from MMA side of things. And then as it kept going on, obviously, he had that great 8th round. He never really did slow down. Like it from your perspective, were there sort of people, you're looking at people like, what is actually going on here? Because that's certainly how we felt at home.
Yeah. I mean, I was Carl was standing next to me, like we were going through each round and we were discussing the round and we were well, there was this punch and but like I really thoroughly enjoyed working with all the team, to be honest. But Carl and I had really good quality back and forth during the fight. And when it got to the halfway point, like when it was the start of the 5th round, and I saw Ngannou stand up and he was. It just a little bit looked like he was starting to get tired. I was like, well, if Fury takes over now, I've made peace with that because it's already a win because of what he's achieved already. But I think, honestly, because he'd landed such quality punches, because he'd got Fury's respect, and because Fury realized he couldn't wrestle with him in the clinch, he was too strong, like then that put Fury on the back foot a little bit and forced him to consider anything that he threw a lot more than he would have done, if the first rounds hadn't gone the way that he did. So I think the quality of the work that Ngannou did in the early rounds allowed him to be a little bit tired in the second half and not get punished quite as much for it, because Fury just didn't want to roll the dice and take the chance. Like they've already got the Usyk fight in the back of their mind. The worst case scenario is that A gets knocked or B gets cut badly and that fight doesn't go ahead. Better to win a close decision on the scorecards and let the boxing community rally behind him and make an argument for it than to give him an undeniable win for Ngannou by rushing into range and getting knocked out.
You mentioned the Usyk fight, and obviously the plan was December 23rd. It seems like that's not going to be the case now. But even after the fight on Saturday night, it seemed like the whole sort of face off and them teasing that fight, it didn't go as planned because it just seemed very rushed because of the nature of the fight. In your perspective, is that sort of the quality of that fight now and the massive thing that it was supposed to be is took a massive hit because when a date does come for it, everyone's going to say, well, look at how the last fight went. We want to see Fury and Ngannou too. No one wants to see really Fury Usyk now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I think it certainly did take a lot of the shine off the matchup. There was a feeling when I was there. There was a feeling that this was a promotional drive to promote the Usyk fight. And Fury looked like he was halfway through a training camp for Usyk. He didn't look like he was at the end of a training camp for Ngannou. I think he felt like it was going to be like a rough exhibition match with someone that he was going to handle pretty comfortably. And then 4 or 5 rounds in, when Ngannou was being picked up by the doctors, he was going to be like, right, you come here, Usyk, we're next. Big promotional drive, and everyone's like, these are the 2 baddest men on the planet. But it just didn't happen. I mean, even in the post-fight interview, he said that it didn't go according to the script, and he just didn't look like he was confident in his performance or his win. But I also don't think that was a good reflection of Tyson, right? It was a perfect storm of Tyson not being as well prepared as he should have been, overlooking Francis, and then Francis showing up in better condition and technical form than we ever expected. I still think I still think that if we'd have got the version that rematched Deontay Wilder, it would have probably been a very different fight. And you add 2 more rounds to it, and you give Fury those 2 rounds most likely, and he still wins on the scorecards pretty convincingly at that point. So I honestly don't feel like it's taken a lot of the shine off the Usyk fight for the hardcore. I feel like the layman fan is going to look at him and go, well, you've got to have Ngannou in the conversation now. But I think people with a realistic mind will look at it and go, that wasn't the supremely prepared Fury. And I think, if anything, Usyk's going to get a harder version of Fury now because of the closeness of the Ngannou fight. I still want to see that. I still want an undisputed heavyweight champ. But I also like the fact that Ngannou is now going to be in the picture and in the rankings, the WBC.
You know the UFC better than anyone, right? And something a lot of people have said after this is, God, Dana White's going to be absolutely kicking himself that he didn't let Francis go and do this, and then he could come back to the UFC. But would you also see it as, look, they did it with Conor. That's what it was. Obviously, he did a good job against Floyd, but ultimately he lost. Whereas this one, no one really gave Francis a shot, right? You can look at one half and say, well, they could have let him do it. He would have got schooled, then go back to the UFC. But you do have to look at the point and think, well, look, if the UFC did decide to let him do this, he'd be going back now as arguably the baddest man on the planet. But instead, he's going back to the PFL and they're doing that, right? So I fear for whoever his first opponent is in the PFL, but we sort of said at least they're getting 2 million guaranteed for it.
Yeah. I mean, everyone talks about, Francis is a real nice guy. And yeah, he is. He's one of the nicest people you'll meet in combat sports. But there's something a little sinister, I think, for negotiating your opponent's purse to be at such an amount that you can make peace with punching them in the face as hard as you can. Do you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't want to knock somebody out and them not get paid. I'm like, okay, I'm going to knock you out, so I want you compensated for it. That's kind of how it feels to me in Ngannou's approach. I mean, he is the king of combat sports today. It doesn't matter whether he didn't get the win at the weekend. Because we know that in a fight, Ngannou wins that every day. I mean, he almost won a boxing match with just the skill set that Fury's an expert in. You just give him low kicks, give him one leg to use, right? Let him clinch and hold and wrestle a little bit. It's a different fight. Ngannou is supreme in that sense when it comes to fighting as opposed to boxing. And yeah, I think Dana's probably kicking himself by not being a part of it and not allowing Ngannou to do that. But Ngannou wasn't negotiating for money. That wasn't what he wanted. He wanted respect and autonomy. And that's something that you're never going to get from the UFC. They're always going to treat you like a commodity, and they're always going to pay you as little as they can and get the most out of you. They're going to squeeze that lemon until there's no juice left in it. And Ngannou now is like, this is something that's always worth considering, I think. Like, Ngannou was signed to the UFC. He works with the PFL, right? It's a different relationship. Like, he's the head of Africa. He's the leader of our pay-per-view card next year when that comes about. He could also potentially be a boxing champion as well. And PFL will stand by him and support him in that. And that's something that UFC would have never have done. And if I'm a fighter, if I'm an MMA fighter, and I'm John Jones or Sean O'Malley or whoever else, and I've got dreams of doing other things, like McGregor was in Riyadh talking to Pacquiao about fighting. He's daydreaming. Like, they're not going to let him do that. There's they just won't allow it. Not unless Dana's had a change of heart and he decides he's going to take that risk. But I just don't see it happening. Like, control is the UFC's main focus. And if they've got fighters that are uncontrollable, they can't make the most money out of them. So I don't think it would have. Even after knowing this, I don't think Dana would have allowed Ngannou to have that kind of control of his career.
And finally, obviously, you worked, covering this fight with Ngannou. You'll be covering his next, which is planning to be in the PFL, hopefully March, February time. It's hard to really draft up an opponent for him for that because there's a lot of unknowns. But who would you sort of put for him to face in the PFL? And then, like you said, hopefully if things go to plan for him in that, he wants to come back to boxing. So what are the sort of 2 next steps you see for Francis after this?
Well, I mean, if I was daydreaming, he would be fighting Tyson Fury in MMA. I'd like to see Fury put on the small gloves and step into the smart cage. But after potentially not winning a boxing match against him, I don't think he's going to give him any other skills that he can use. There are lots of good heavyweights on the planet. Some of them are on the UFC roster, some of them are not. Some of them are in different organizations that could potentially work with us. Some are in organizations that they could potentially leave and move over into the PFL. Like we've got a lot of good options for him. But the other thing to consider as well is like time has passed since Ngannou left the UFC, and time has passed since he announced that his opponent would get $2 million. And I know for sure there are fighters on other organizations' rosters that are not getting a fraction of that. So why not fight out of your contract and cross over, right? That's what makes the most sense to me. If you're a big puncher and a heavyweight, star, and you're getting paid some, meager amount of money compared to what you would make in an Ngannou fight out of your contract, right? Heavyweights are more prize fighters than any other weight class in the world because they're big dudes that have got heavy hands. And some of them are not there because they love martial arts. Some of them are there because they're knockout punchers and they can make money off it. So where's the biggest pot of cash? Come and get it. That's what I'm saying. And I still think there's time for some big names to fight out of their contracts and move over. And with Jones having a pectoral muscle tear, with Stipe being in his mid-40s now, I think the options are elsewhere for heavyweights now, and I think we've realised that this weekend.